All right, get ready because we're going to take a deep dive into a truly historic moment. Ilaiyaraaja, the absolute legend of Indian film music, just presented his first Western classical symphony in London.
Wow, yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable when you think about everything he's already accomplished. I
Yeah.
mean, this is the guy who basically changed how Indian film music sounds, especially when it comes to Tamil cinema. Over 1,000 films, 8,500 songs, and now a Western classical
It's
symphony.
like he climbed this huge musical mountain and now he's decided, okay, on to the next one, an even bigger one. And to make things even crazier, he decided to debut this symphony, Valiant, at the Eventim Apollo in London. You know that place that's hosted giants like the Beatles and Elton John?
Yeah. No, it's a big deal, the Eventim Apollo.
Hmm.
5,000 seats, a ton of musical history. I bet the energy there was electric. And to top it off, you got the Royal Philharmonic Concert Orchestra. They're famous for being able to play anything, bringing Ilaiyaraaja's vision to life. They were led by conductor Mikkel Toms.
I'm trying to picture myself in that audience, hearing a piece by Shostakovich, and then, bam, Valiant, this completely new symphony from an Indian film composer.
Mhm.
And then, as if that wasn't enough, they played some of Ilaiyaraaja's most popular film scores.
Yeah.
What a wild mix of musical worlds.
It's bold, for sure. This wasn't just a concert, it was a cultural statement. He's the first Indian film composer to do this in London, a city that's basically the heart of Western classical music.
It really shows how ambitious he is.
Hmm.
He believes that music can break down any wall. It's like he's shouting to the world, hey everyone, Indian music has so much to offer, and I'm going to show you exactly what it can do.
Yeah, and the reactions from the people at the concert have been incredible. This London-based pianist, Aniru Krishna, described it as a surreal experience. Social media is blowing up with praise and just pure amazement.
Okay, so we've established that this is huge. But before we go any further, let's back up a bit. For those who might not know Ilaiyaraaja's work that well, could you give us a quick rundown of his journey? How did this guy, who started in a small village in Tamil Nadu, reach such incredible heights?
His story is like the perfect example of what talent, dedication, and hard work can do. He was born as Nanathesigan in this tiny village, and it was clear from a young age that he was obsessed with music. When he was just 14, he joined a traveling musical troupe and spent almost a decade going all over South India. Can you imagine all the things he learned and experienced during those years?
That sounds like a musical education you can't get anywhere else. Not in some fancy academy, but out there in the real world, immersed in the energy of live performance.
Exactly. And that strong background in traditional Carnatic music is what allowed him to be so innovative later on. He wasn't afraid to use Western instruments or harmonies. He blended them right into his film scores and created something completely new.
So this fusion, this blending of different worlds, was there right from the start of his career.
You could definitely say that's his signature style. He took the familiar sounds of Carnatic music and mixed in Western elements. That created something that felt both traditional and modern, both local and global, all at the same time.
And that sound, that unique Ilaiyaraaja magic, became the soundtrack for a whole generation, right?
Yeah, totally. His melodies were so soulful, his arrangements were so intricate, and he had this way of capturing the essence of a story through music that just resonated with people. His scores weren't just background music, they were an essential part of the whole movie experience, amplifying the emotions and pulling the audience deeper into the story.
He's more than just a composer. He's a storyteller, using music as his language. His impact on Indian cinema, especially in Tamil cinema, is undeniable.
Absolutely. We're talking about over 8,500 songs composed, and he even wrote the lyrics for over 1,500 of them. On top of that, he created background music for 150,000 minutes of film. It's insane.
Those are crazy numbers for anyone, let alone someone who started out in a traveling band. But it wasn't just about quantity. It was the quality, the innovation, and that constant pushing of boundaries that earned him all the recognition.
Totally. He's won so many prestigious awards like the Padma Bhushan and the Padma Vibhushan. Those are two of the highest civilian honors you can get in India. And in 2022, he was even nominated for the Raaja Sabha, the upper house of India's parliament. It's pretty amazing going from a small village to the halls of power, all because of music.
It just shows you how much of an impact he's had on Indian culture as a whole. He's not just a musician, he's a national treasure, a cultural icon. His music has touched the lives of millions. But let's get back to Valiant. This symphony, this sudden jump into Western classical music, it seems to have come out of nowhere. Did this idea develop over time, or was it just a burst of inspiration?
There's this behind-the-scenes video where Ilaiyaraaja himself is like, whoa, this was a challenge. He says, every day I was recording a song or a film score. Then all of a sudden, I got this idea to write a symphony. It sounds like this creative urge just took over him and Valiant just poured out.
That's so interesting. He spent decades immersed in film music, and then boom, this completely different form of music just emerges. What do you think caused this sudden shift? Was there a specific moment, an event, or a piece of music that triggered this creative urge?
That's a really good question. We don't know for sure, but here's something interesting. He actually wrote a symphony way back in 1993, but decided not to release it. Maybe something changed within him, maybe personally or artistically, and now felt like the right time to share his symphony with the world.
So this Symphony Valiant isn't just a debut. It's like a culmination of all those years of musical exploration, maybe even a way of coming to terms with his own growth as an artist.
It does seem that way. And that makes me wonder, what does this move into Western classical music mean for his legacy? Is this a new chapter, a total reinvention? Or is it just the next step in his journey, a way of connecting all the different musical worlds he's explored throughout his career?
These are some questions we'll definitely explore more as we delve deeper into Valiant. But before we get lost in this grand symphony, let's take a closer look at its building blocks. What can you tell us about its structure and how it mixes those Western and Indian classical elements?
So Valiant is a 45-minute symphony, and it's divided into 4 movements. The first 2 movements are pure Western classical music. The last 2, however, bring in those Indian classical influences. It's this mix, this weaving together of the familiar and the new that makes Ilaiyaraaja so unique.
It's like he's leading his listeners on this journey. It starts in a familiar place, the world of Western classical music. But then as you get comfortable, he slowly introduces these new colors, these unfamiliar textures from Indian classical music.
Yeah, exactly. And to understand those colors and textures, we need to talk about ragas and talas. They're like the foundation of Indian classical music.
Okay, for those of us who might not be experts in Indian classical music, can you give us a crash course? What are ragas and talas, and how do they work within a piece of music?
Sure. Think of a raga as a set of rules for a melody, a framework that guides improvisation and sets a certain mood or emotion. It's kind of like a musical scale, but way more nuanced and complex. Each raga has its own distinct character. It has a set of ascending and descending notes and specific rules about how to ornament and phrase them.
So it's not just about playing the right notes, it's about how you approach them, the way you bend them, the way you add those little embellishments, and the way you create this sense of flow and emotion within that melodic framework.
Yeah, you got it. It's all about creating a certain atmosphere, a feeling, a story, just by subtly changing notes and phrases. And then you've got the talas. These are rhythmic cycles that basically provide the structure for the music. Think of them like time signatures in Western music, but again, they're much more complex and varied.
So the talas set the beat, the pulse of the music, while the ragas provide the melodic structure, the emotional landscape where the musicians can improvise and express themselves.
Yeah, you've got it. And by using these elements in his symphony, Ilaiyaraaja adds a whole new layer of complexity and richness to the Western classical form.
It's as if he's starting a conversation between these two musical traditions, letting them influence and enrich each other. It results in something totally new and unexpected.
And even though we haven't seen the score, so we can only guess, I'm sure that knowing how innovative Ilaiyaraaja is and how deeply he understands both types of music, he's found some amazing ways to blend those ragas and talas right into the symphony.
Maybe he's using traditional Indian instruments along with the Western orchestra to create this one-of-a-kind soundscape. Or perhaps he's found ways to translate those melodic and rhythmic structures of ragas and talas into something the Western orchestral instruments can play.
Oh, those are great ideas. It's like he's opening up this whole new world of possibilities. He's showing that these two very different musical traditions don't just have to exist side by side. They can actually support and make each other even better.
And that, I think, gets to the heart of what Valiant is all about. It's not just about blending different sounds together. It's about building bridges between cultures. It's about creating this new musical language that goes beyond borders and speaks to something universal within all of us.
Totally. And since we're talking about bridging cultures, let's circle back to the fact that Valiant was recorded with 2 different orchestras, the Royal Scottish National Orchestra and the Royal Philharmonic Concert Orchestra. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that really piques my curiosity. It's like having 2 chefs cook the same dish. They both bring their own styles and interpretations to the recipe. So we essentially have
Yeah.
two different versions of Valiant, right?
Exactly. Which leads to some really interesting questions. Are there big differences in how they interpreted the music? Does one orchestra focus on certain parts more than the other?
Unfortunately, we don't have both recordings to do a side-by-side comparison, at least not right now. But I can already imagine the subtle differences in how they phrased things, the dynamics, the overall emotional impact of each performance.
Every orchestra has its own unique sound, its own history and tradition. So even if they're playing the same notes, the way those notes come to life in the concert hall, how they actually sound, is going to be different.
It makes you realize how much of a team effort orchestral music really is. It's not just about what the composer wants. It's this conversation between the composer, the conductor, the musicians, and even the audience.
It's like this ever-evolving conversation. Each performance, each interpretation adds something new to the music, a new layer of meaning and nuance.
Okay, so we've talked about all the praise for Valiant, the excitement and pride it's generated. But have there been any voices of dissent? Any critics who aren't totally on board with this fusion of musical worlds?
Well, yeah, there have been a few, just like with any work that tries to break new ground. Some people say that the symphony relies too much on Western classical structures, that it doesn't have that signature Ilaiyaraaja sound we hear in his film scores.
That's interesting, isn't it? Some see that influence as a bad thing, while others see it as proof of his ability to absorb and transform different musical languages. I wonder if those criticisms come from a desire to keep music in neat little boxes, to separate traditions instead of letting them interact and grow.
I think you're onto something there. People like what they know, it's comfortable. But art, especially music, has always been about pushing boundaries. It's about breaking down walls and creating something new and surprising.
And Ilaiyaraaja has never been one to shy away from experimenting. At his core, he's always been about fusion, about taking different musical threads and weaving them together to create something beautiful and thought-provoking.
Exactly. And Valiant is a perfect example of that spirit of exploration. It shows that he's not afraid of the unknown, that he's willing to create something truly unique. It might not fit perfectly into any category, but that's what makes it so captivating.
It reminds us that music, at its heart, is about expressing emotions, telling stories, and connecting with people. And there are endless ways to do that, no matter what the genre or tradition.
Now, looking ahead to part 2 of our deep dive, I'm really interested in exploring the emotional and philosophical heart of Valiant. What does this symphony, with its blend of Western and Indian classical elements, tell us about Ilaiyaraaja's vision as an artist? What emotions is he trying to evoke? What story is he trying to tell?
Those are great questions, and ones I'm eager to unpack myself. We've talked about how important Valiant is culturally, about its innovative way of mixing musical traditions and all the positive feedback it's gotten. But now it's time to go deeper, to explore the emotional and philosophical world that Ilaiyaraaja has created with this symphony.
Yeah, and maybe by doing that, we'll understand not just Valiant better, but also the man behind the music. We'll get a glimpse into his incredible journey and the legacy he's building. Join us for part 2 as we continue our deep dive into Ilaiyaraaja's Valiant. Welcome back to our deep dive into Valiant, the incredible symphony from Ilaiyaraaja, the master of Indian film music. Before we really get into the music itself, we were talking about all the amazing reactions Valiant has gotten and its cultural impact. But now I'm really excited to dig into those musical themes we touched on earlier. Where do we even start with a symphony that blends two such rich and complex musical traditions?
It feels like a symphony that begs to be explored, a journey through all these different soundscapes. We talked about how those first two movements are pure Western classical, while the last two bring in those Indian classical influences. That's where things get really interesting.
Exactly. It's like he's setting the stage with this familiar sound, and then once you're settled in, he starts introducing these new colors, these textures that might be unfamiliar, all from Indian classical music.
Right, and to understand those colors and textures, we need to talk about ragas and talas. They're like the DNA of Indian classical music.
Exactly.
Okay, so for those of us who might not be fluent in Indian classical music, can you give us a quick lesson? What are ragas and talas, and how do they actually work within a musical piece?
Sure. Imagine a raga as a set of rules for a melody, a kind of framework that guides improvisation and creates a specific mood or emotion. You can think of it like a musical scale, but it's way more nuanced and complex. Each raga has its own unique personality, its own set of ascending and descending notes, and very specific rules about how to ornament and phrase them.
So it's not just about hitting the right notes, it's about how you play those notes, the way you bend them, the way you add those subtle flourishes, and the way you create this sense of flow and emotion within that melodic framework.
Exactly. It's about creating a certain atmosphere, a feeling, a story, all through subtle changes in notes and phrases. And then you have talas. Talas are rhythmic cycles that give the music its basic structure. You can compare them to time signatures in Western music, but again, they're a lot more intricate and varied.
So the talas provide the rhythmic foundation, the heartbeat of the music, and the ragas provide the melodic structure, the emotional landscape, where the musicians can improvise and really express themselves.
That's a perfect way to put it. And by incorporating these elements into his symphony, Ilaiyaraaja is essentially bringing a whole new dimension of musical richness and complexity to the Western classical form.
It's like he's creating this dialogue between the two traditions, allowing them to influence and enrich each other and creating something totally new and unexpected in the process.
And although we don't have the score in front of us, so we can only speculate, I'm willing to bet that knowing how innovative Ilaiyaraaja is and his deep understanding of both musical styles, he's found some really creative ways to weave those ragas and talas right into the symphony.
I mean, who knows? Maybe he's using traditional Indian instruments alongside the Western orchestra, creating this one-of-a-kind sound. Or maybe he's figured out a way to translate the melodic and rhythmic structures of ragas and talas into something the Western orchestral instruments can play.
Yeah, those are interesting possibilities. It's like he's opening up all these new doors, showing that these two very different musical traditions don't just have to exist separately. They can actually work together, complement each other, and make each other even better.
And that, to me, feels like the heart of Valiant. It's not just about blending sounds together, it's about building bridges between cultures. It's about creating a whole new musical language that can reach across borders and speak to something universal that we all share.
Absolutely. And speaking of crossing borders, let's come back to the fact that Valiant was actually recorded by two different orchestras, the Royal Scottish National Orchestra and the Royal Philharmonic Concert Orchestra. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's where it gets really interesting for me. It's like having two chefs create the same dish, but they each bring their own unique style, their own interpretation to the table. So we essentially have two distinct versions of Valiant, right?
Yeah, and that brings up some really interesting questions. Are there noticeable differences in how they approach the music? Does one orchestra put more emphasis on certain aspects than the other?
Well, it's a shame we don't have both recordings handy to compare side by side, at least not right now.
Hmm.
But just thinking about it, I can imagine those subtle differences in phrasing, the dynamics, the overall emotional impact of each performance.
For sure. Every orchestra has its own distinct sound, its own history and traditions. So even if they're playing the exact same notes, the way those notes come to life in the concert hall, the way they resonate, is going to be different.
It really makes you appreciate the collaborative nature of orchestral music. It's not just about the composer's vision, it's a conversation between the composer, the conductor, the musicians, even the audience, all playing a part.
It's like an ongoing conversation, constantly evolving. Every performance, every interpretation adds a new layer of meaning, a new nuance to the music.
So we've talked about all the positive reactions to Valiant, the excitement, the pride. But what about the other side of the coin? Have there been any dissenting voices, any critics who weren't completely sold on this fusion of musical worlds?
Oh, there have been a few, which is normal for anything that tries to do something new. Some critics say the symphony leans too heavily on those Western classical structures and that it doesn't have that distinct Ilaiyaraaja sound we hear in his film scores.
It's interesting, right? Some people see that influence as a drawback, while others see it as proof of his ability to absorb and transform different musical languages. I wonder if maybe those criticisms come from a desire to keep music in these neat, separate categories instead of letting traditions mix and evolve organically.
I think there's some truth to that. There's a certain comfort in familiarity. We like to stick with what we know, but art and music especially has always been about pushing the boundaries, breaking down those walls, and creating something new and unexpected.
And Ilaiyaraaja has never been someone who shies away from experimenting. Fusion is kind of his thing. He takes those different musical threads and weaves them together to create something beautiful and thought-provoking.
Exactly. Valiant is a perfect example of that adventurous spirit. It shows he isn't afraid to venture into the unknown, to create something truly unique. It may not fit neatly into a box, but that's exactly what makes it so compelling.
You know, it's a good reminder that music, at its core, is all about expressing emotions, telling stories, connecting with people. And there are so many ways to do that, no matter the genre or tradition.
Right. Now, as we move on to part 3 of our deep dive, I'm really interested in getting into the emotional and philosophical core of Valiant. What does this symphony, this blend of Western and Indian classical music, tell us about Ilaiyaraaja's artistic vision? What feelings is he trying to stir up? What story is he trying to tell?
Oh, those are excellent questions. Questions I'm dying to explore myself. We've talked about Valiant's cultural significance, its unique way of merging musical traditions, and all the positive buzz it's generated. But now it's time to get to the heart of this symphony, to explore the emotional and philosophical world that Ilaiyaraaja has created.
And maybe, in doing so, we'll not only understand Valiant better, but also get a glimpse into the mind of the man behind the music. We'll understand his remarkable journey and the legacy he's building. Join us for part 3 as we continue our deep dive into the world of Ilaiyaraaja's Valiant.
Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into Valiant. We've covered so much ground, the fusion of musical worlds, the cultural impact, even gotten into some technical details. But now, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about something a little less concrete. What is it about this symphony that really grabs you? What's the emotional core, the feeling that Ilaiyaraaja is trying to get across with Valiant?
Yeah, that's where we move past the notes on the page and get to the heart of it, the shared human experience. And to truly understand that, we have to look at Ilaiyaraaja's whole career.
Right, you can't just analyze Valiant on its own. We have to think about his other work, his journey as a musician.
Think about his film scores. They evoke such a wide range of emotions: joy, sadness, longing, triumph. His music has this uncanny ability to connect with us on a deep level, to resonate with our own lives, our own happiness and pain.
It's like he's giving a voice to those universal feelings we all have, even if we struggle to put them into words.
Exactly. And I think that same emotional depth is there in Valiant, even though it's expressed through a different musical style. It's not just about technical skill, it's about the heart, the soul that he pours into his music.
What about the title itself? Valiant. It suggests courage, resilience, facing challenges head on. Do you see a connection there to Ilaiyaraaja's own personal journey?
It's hard not to. Remember what he said in that behind-the-scenes video? Every day I used to record a song or a film score. Suddenly I thought of writing a symphony. That sounds like someone who wants to conquer a new challenge, to push themselves beyond what they're comfortable with.
And Valiant becomes a testament to that, to his boldness in taking on something as massive as a Western classical symphony after decades of being a master in a completely different musical world.
And don't forget the interesting tidbit we talked about earlier, the symphony he wrote back in 1993 but never released. It's almost like he had to wait to gain more life experience, more musical wisdom, before he was ready to share his symphony with the world.
So Valiant isn't just a debut, it's a statement. It's the culmination of his whole journey, a declaration that he's earned his place among the greats of Western classical music.
And he's not doing it by erasing or minimizing his Indian roots. He brings them with him, weaving them right into the fabric of this new musical world.
It's that fusion, that fearless blending of traditions that makes Valiant so groundbreaking. He's not just borrowing sounds. He's creating this dialogue, this new language that goes beyond those cultural boundaries we often cling to.
And people are responding to it. Listeners have described it as transcendent, a spiritual journey. Those aren't just throwaway compliments. They're talking about a truly powerful experience.
It's as if he's tapped into something universal, something that speaks to the human experience, no matter your cultural background or taste in music.
Right. Which brings us to the legacy of Valiant. How will this symphony be remembered? What impact will it have on the future of music?
Those are big questions. It's early to say for sure, but I have a feeling this isn't just a one-time thing. This feels like the beginning of something much larger.
I think so too. Valiant could be a turning point, a moment that changes how we think about musical traditions, cultural boundaries, even the possibilities of artistic expression.
It's as if he's opened the doors wide and invited the world to come in and experience something truly unique and inspiring.
And that invitation, that challenge to embrace the unknown, that's what I hope becomes Valiant's lasting impact. It's a reminder that music doesn't have to be limited, that it can bridge cultures, bring people together, create understanding.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Valiant, what's the one thought, the one feeling that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I'd say, don't be afraid to explore. Don't let yourself be limited by categories or labels. Ilaiyaraaja's Valiant shows what can happen when you're curious, when you break down barriers, when you create something beautiful and meaningful from unexpected combinations.
Find Valiant, listen to it, let its beauty and complexity wash over you. Who knows, maybe it'll even inspire you to create something incredible yourself. This has been The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating journey of discovery.